Okay, this is stop number 4. This is 18th Street right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to come down here, and I'll give you a hand, Sheila, if you need it.
Yeah, I might.
Okay. So we're going to come down here, and this is where we're going to look for shark teeth. And before we do that, one thing to tell you guys, in case you come down here, I didn't see any right here, but this is one place where we do tend to find poison ivy. And if I see any, I'll point it out to everybody in case you don't know what poison ivy looks like. For instance, right here, that is poison ivy, where there are 3 leaflets there, 3 leaflets there, 3 leaflets right there. Sometimes the leaves are kind of reddish. So if you see something like that, and you don't know that you're immune, because not everybody is, or most people are not immune, if you don't know that you're not sensitive to it or immune to it, don't touch it, because you can get a skin rash. Okay, so let's come down here first. And the first thing to notice, I'm going to leave this right here. Pardon me? Just come right down here, and we'll come down the rest of the way in a minute. First thing to notice is right here. You don't need to come here, Sheila. And what do we see here? This is pretty unusual. We have here a waterfall. And that's, as you know, kind of an unusual thing to find in Florida. The question is, where is this coming from? And if you remember when we went to Devil's Mill Hopper, we also found a waterfall there. Why do we find a waterfall there? Because this is an impermeable layer on which develops, anybody remember? On which develops a perched water table. And not only is this also a perched water table, this is the same layer of rock that was present in the Devil's Mill Hopper to give us a perched water table over there. So water percolates down from above and comes out here, and this is basically a spring right here, and it leaks down and runs down and rejoins the rest of Hogtown Creek over there. Okay, so let's move back up here. And we will, that's actually, no, we're going to go over here, which is a much better way to go. Okay, well, we'll see. But we're going to go down over here, and we're going to go all the way down to the creek. You can't? Okay. Well, I'm going to go down here, and Sheila's going to carry some stuff down for me then. Now, one thing about this is private property, and we have been given permission by the owner of the land to come down here. But if you want to come down here and look for shark teeth, which is what we're going to do among other things, then you really need to make sure that you get in contact with the landowner. And the landowner is on the south side of the creek. Okay, I'm going to turn this off because I need to bring a bunch of other stuff down here. Okay, guys, we are now at the bottom of Hogtown Creek, and again, if you look at the topographic map, you'll be able to see it. And one of the things I want you to notice is that we're right down here, and look how beautifully clear the water is. It's beautifully clear, but you couldn't pay me to drink this water because, as I said before, it's polluted with a lot of things that you may not even be able to see. Obviously, that is not a natural opening. That's a culvert. And the first thing to notice in your lab for Stop 4, it says describe the topography. So when you look at this, you can see that now we are quite steeply incised into the earth, and we have some very steep riverbanks. And in fact, if I'd had the camera on as we were driving over here, you'd see that going from 16th Avenue, which is in that direction, we come down a hill, and then we go back up to 8th Avenue. So this, in fact, is a quite wide river valley, which is almost as wide as the distance between 16th and 8th Avenue. So what kind of stage of river development, in other words, what kind of topography do you have here? This is a nice classic example of a mature river valley. And one of the things to notice here, you see this tree that right here that is coming out of the side and bending in a J shape? You can see these branches are all doing the same thing. That branch, well, that branch died, but you can see he was trying to go up. This one is doing it. This is a classic example of creep that we talked about when we saw the Devil's Millhopper. The same thing is happening here. We're getting slow, gradual mass wasting on the riverbanks, and as a result, a lot of, and here's a beautiful example of a J-shaped tree trunk right there going upwards. You can definitely tell that this is an area which is experiencing significant amounts of mass wasting. Some other things to notice. Notice that the river does not have a straight course. Instead, it's bending back and forth. And this happens when a river is nearing its base level. It's not very much able to erode downwards. And you can see this is a small creek. That goes up to the waterfall, and then this is the main part of the creek. There's not a lot of water rolling in here. So this river has stopped eroding downwards mostly, and is mostly eroding sideways. And you may remember when we were in the Devil's Millhopper that we talked about these bends in the river known as meanders. And what happens is once a river develops any kind of a small bend, the water tends to flow to the outside of the bend and erode away at the riverbank. And you can see over here on the left side and over here on the left side in that direction, the riverbank is quite steep. But on the right side, where you can see this tripod, which I'm going to put the camera into in a minute, we have sand and gravel built up here. And over here, we also have sand and gravel built up right there, right over here. And that is a beautiful example of a point bar. So we have point bar on the right, we have a cut bank on the left, and that tells you that this, over time, this meander will grow larger and larger and larger, and the bend will get larger and larger and larger over time. Now, in a couple of minutes, question number 2, what is the relief from the valley rim, which is really up to there, down to this level? What's the relief from the valley rim to the channel bottom? And you can see that if you look at down at the bottom where that water is cascading off the concrete, going all the way up to the top of the concrete, and then another couple feet higher than that, what would you say that is? Maybe 15, maybe even 20 feet, something like that. So that's the relief from here. If you think about the relief of the entire valley that we're in, look at how high on the contour map, look how high 8th Avenue and 16th Avenue are, and then look at the elevation down here. And I'll put marks on the contour map that I'll put into your website, or into this website, or Canvas page, and you can measure what the relief is from the absolute top down to the bottom of this valley. Okay, what we're going to do next is we're going to look for some shark teeth. And the way that we're going to do that, there's lots of gravel here. The best place to look actually would be right down under there where the water's coming down, but I can't really get to that. Why do you think I wouldn't want to start wading in this water? Remember that this is very badly polluted water. When I was a graduate student, I was walking down into this up to, in some areas, in deeper areas than this, up to my chest. And it's not a very good idea. I'm really actually significantly concerned that in the future the chemicals that I may have absorbed from that may affect me in some unfortunate ways. Well, what I've done is I've got some sieves right here. These sieves, they're wooden frames, and the bottom one has 1/4-inch mesh, what's called hardware cloth. You can get this at Lowe's or Home Depot. The top one right here has 1/2-inch mesh, and so we can sieve out shark teeth that are larger than a half inch, that are between a half inch and a quarter, and anything smaller than that will drop on through. What I've done also is I brought a shovel and a pail so that I can scoop up some sediment, put it into that sieve, and then rinse it through. So I'm going to turn this off for a minute, and then, or what the heck, I'll just leave it on, and you guys can see how this is done. Okay, I think you can see, let's see from that, I'm not sure I can even see it. I'm going to move this a bit closer so you can see that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to find some nice gravelly areas and scoop up some of the material, and the odds are pretty good that there might be some shark teeth in there. And I'll try to take some from the shore, and I'll also try to get some here because the active part of the stream will be depositing things in there. So I'll get a good amount in here. By the way, you don't need fancy sieves like this. You can make these sieves pretty easily with very basic woodworking tools. Okay, I made these fairly fancy because I wanted the school to be able to use these over the years. And so, okay, I turned that off for a second, but it's on again now. So now I'm going to scoop up some water and rinse it through here. And as you do this, if you're going to try this, take out the big stuff like that. And also be very careful because there's often lots of glass in here because people are messy and litter bugs. There's another big piece. That's definitely nothing I want to look at. There's another piece of glass, some big rocks, some leaves. You might also occasionally find organisms in here, some live clams, various kinds of insect larvae that live underwater. And if you want to get real fancy, what you can even do if there's a deep part of the creek is you can lower this whole series of sieves into the water and rinse out the sand and mud that way. But we don't have any really deep parts right here. Okay, so let me look and see what we can find. Oh, I've got a bad knee problem today, so a back problem. So there's another piece of glass. So we can go through these. And I know people, by the way, who have found very large teeth, like 3 or 4 inches long, well, 2 or 3 inches long, in the creek, but it takes a lot of looking to find something that size. So my guess is we aren't going to be that lucky. By the way, normally I let my students, since I've found so many teeth over the years, I let my students keep them, but in this case, obviously, I get to keep them because you aren't here. Okay, now here's a piece of limestone, and there's a bunch of pieces of limestone. This is much older material. This is material from the Ocala limestone. Think about one of the questions in your lab. I think the only one we haven't answered so far is where do these fossils come from? And these fossils, remember the Ocala limestone is no younger than about 35 million years old. These are considerably younger than that. These come from layers that are above that when this area was still below sea level, but where instead of having limestone, we had mostly clays. And as the material, there's another nice piece, that's a very fossiliferous piece. of limestone, but it's Ocala, so we're looking for some younger stuff. As you go down, as you go up above the Ocala, you'll find younger material. Now that is part of a limb bone. I don't know if you can see it. I'll put that in my little jar. That, I'm not sure what that's from, but it's dark, so it's almost certainly fossil. And what I'll do is, when I get back to my home, I'll rinse these off and take some still photos so you can see them. But this material was not in the limestone. This material was in the overlying material, mostly clay and sand. And as that clay and sand eroded away, this is the material that was left behind, because teeth and bones are a lot more resistant to erosion than limestone and clay. Okay, I don't see anything else in here, but let's take a look now in here. This is the older one, and I will tell you guys that the way to find stuff in small samples like this is to really get down in there. You all probably have better sight than I do, but I have to get real close in order to see things. And hopefully we'll find a couple of shark teeth. You will find things like that. There is a snail shell, but that's a recent snail shell. That's not fossil. Just like we saw, in fact, at McGehee Farm. Okay, now here, and I'll show this to you up close. I'll take a photo. That is a stingray tooth, very similar. Some of you found some stingray teeth in at McGehee. Okay, there's another. Okay, there's another stingray tooth, and you'll see later on. It's smooth on one side, but it's corrugated on the other, and the corrugated part in the stingray is the part that faces into the food, basically. So, as you're doing this is about how long you want to look at everything. Just scan over real quickly, and if you see something, take it. If you don't, just... Oh, and there's a shark tooth. Okay. So I'll show you that. Oh, and there's another shark tooth. Okay, and I also found in this handful, I also found another stingray tooth. And so here we go. There's two shark teeth, and there's a nice big stingray tooth. So hopefully y'all can see it. Again, I'll take a photograph of it later. Okay. So this, by the way, is a very nice way to spend a hot summer afternoon. There's another stingray tooth. Remember, though, that the water here is pretty filthy. And what I'm going to do when I get home is to wash, even aside from the coronavirus, after a trip like this, I always thoroughly wash my hands, and I also rinse anything that I find, shark teeth or anything else, in water. I let it sit in clean water, and usually change the water every day or so for several days, and that way hopefully I allow most of the really nasty pollutants to. There's another shark tooth. I let the pollutants seep out of these things. If you do come and collect something like this, then the thing to do is to not touch them an awful lot, because, as I said, the water here is polluted, and because of that, the teeth are very likely somewhat contaminated as well. Okay, nothing there. By the way, I'm going through this real quick. As I go through this, as you're watching the YouTube, there's a pretty good chance that you might see in my hand something that I'm going to miss, and just give me a hard time if you see it, and let me know, and I'm not going to come back here and find it. There's another stingray tooth. So this is a lot more fun to do in person than to watch somebody else doing it. There's another shark tooth. So this is actually a pretty good haul. The best time to come down here to look for shark teeth is after a heavy rain, before anybody else. There's another shark tooth. A heavy rain and nobody else has had time to come here. In this particular case, of course, we haven't had rain for a couple of weeks at least. But the flip side is because of the coronavirus, nobody is apparently coming down here except for crazy people like me. And as a result, we are able to find some shark teeth. The other thing to think about is that people sometimes think, oh, this is a waterway, this is a public area for people to go in. And that's actually not the case. A waterway, in order for it to be public access, has to be what the term is navigable, which means you can pilot a boat, at least something like a canoe. And this water obviously is far too shallow to do that. So a very narrow creek like this, the term that we use for this is private property. And if you want to go and look in the creeks of Gainesville for shark teeth or anything else like that, then you really should check with the homeowners to make sure it's okay with them. Most people are fine with it, but there are some that don't want you to do that, and this is their property, so they can tell you to take a hike, literally. The other thing is that if you do go to an area like this, you'll notice that I was digging a little bit in the bottom of the stream, but that's going to be eroded away very, very shortly. But you'll also notice, and I'll take a video of this, on the far side over there, there's a bunch of rocks that have been dumped there. And there was an article recently in the Gainesville Sun about how people have been going into waterways on private property and digging in the riverbanks for shark teeth and really causing a lot of damage. And you don't want to do that. It's, for one thing, it's just damaging to the ecosystem. And of course, the other thing is that if people start doing that a lot, then the homeowners will start calling the police when they see people coming onto their property. And for the people that do look for shark teeth, obviously you don't want to do that. So this is what I found. Well, you can see right in there, there's a few shark teeth. There's that big piece of bone. There's a number of other shark teeth and a number of stingray teeth. This is the kind of thing you can find in this area. You can, and I'll again take photos of that later. But you can also find almost all the different kinds of things, if they're small, that we found in McGehee Farm. You can find fish vertebrae, sometimes larger vertebrae. You can find the bones of a lot of different kinds of animals. Sometimes you can find fish scales as well. So let me just go over here, and you can see right here that somebody has dumped a whole bunch of limestone, and that is probably because people were digging in that riverbank. And we really don't want, certainly as students of Santa Fe College, we don't want to be disrespectful of private property like that, and also just basically damaging to the environment. Okay, I'm going to turn this off now, and we will go next to stop number 5. Okay, everyone, we've got stop 5 now, and this is also Hogtown Creek. And let me grab the camera, and I will show you where we are. We've got a gentle incline over there, and then we've got a bridge going over the creek, and it goes uphill over there as well. And notice, among other things, that the roadway is higher than that house over there. Okay, so let's go through the questions that we've got on stop number 5 right here. Take a look at your handout, the handout, but the online material as well. And you'll see, first of all, it says, what kind of bedding plane features are evident at this stop? And I'm going to point down in here, and it's hard to see, with this camera because the camera has a very short focus, but I'll take some still photos and I'll also take some video with my regular camera, which I can zoom in with. But by bedding plane features, think about what would happen if this lake bed and this sand right here got covered over by sediment and it all lithified, and then you remove the overlying material. Think about the kind of bedding plane features you'd see. So I'll put that on with my other camera. The next question, define point bar and cut bank. And to define those, you might think about what we did at the last stop, where I showed you cut banks and where I showed you point bars. But the basic idea is that there are what eventually result in meanders. And so question number 3 says the stream is meandering across the valley floor. It tends to, and there's 2 questions, and you'll answer that in the Canvas exercise as a multiple choice, down cut or side cut. So in a river that's meandering, is that cutting downwards or is that cutting to the side? Think about that. And the next thing to think about, of course, is the fact that, as you can see, the roadway is higher than the lawn on the left side over here, and you can't really see it over there, but on the right side as well. And so the question is, why is the roadway higher? And this is actually not an accident. The roadway is higher because they are trying to prevent it from flooding. We are down close to the river here, and as this creek fills up, for instance, during hurricanes, it can result in flooding. And if it floods, the last thing you want to have flooding is the roadway. And in fact, by code, municipal code says that roadways have to be high enough so that they are above usually the 100-year flood level, which means that on average only every 100 years it floods. And if you look carefully over at that building, I don't want to embarrass them, but you'll notice there's a boat in their garage, and I don't think they put it there because they're expecting flooding, but they are well prepared. So that's something to think about. Okay, so that actually, and actually let me walk across the street over here. And this has always struck me as another place that we might stop and look for shark teeth, because as you can see, there's a nice point bar right here. There's another bar over there on the other side, and both of these are quite gravelly. And when I was a graduate student, I actually came out to this area as well as the other area and another couple of areas that I'm not going to tell you about, where we hunted for shark teeth, and we were quite successful in finding them. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and we are going to go to our sixth and final stop. I almost forgot. There's one last thing I want to mention. If you'll notice where that vehicle is coming, that is a gentle hill. If you notice, if we go over here in this direction, we also have a gentle hill. So we're still sitting in a valley, but this is a very wide valley. And you'll see this van begin to go uphill in just a second. We have a very wide valley. And this is a little different from our last stop. Our last stop was a classic example of a mature river valley with steep-sided hills. Here we have very gentle hills as the terrain is gradually being eroded away. So we were in a mature area. We are actually headed towards an old age stage of development, and this right here is intermediate between old age and mature. It's not quite a river, it's not quite a floodplain, it's not quite a deep river valley. We'll get a little bit better video in some cases, and I want to show you what some of these bedding plane features are. And down here you can see that there are some ripple marks in the bottom of the stream. And if we look over here at the dry sandbar, if you look carefully, in some cases, like right in the center there, you can see that there are paw prints. And over here, let's see, I'll have to zoom back a little bit to find it. I actually noticed, yes, there are some deer prints. That right there is the print from a cloven hoof right there, and I can't really see exactly where I am here. Let me see if I can find another one. Oh, right there. There's a beautiful cloven hoof print. So deer do come down here. And so this is another kind of bedding plane feature that you tend to find in areas like this. And that, along with the ripple marks that you're finding in the bottom of the river, give you information on what the environment was like. And then the last thing I'll do before shutting the camera off is show you the the part of the garage which I mentioned a minute ago, which has a boat in it, just in case. We're not actually at stop number 6 yet. I'm coming up, this is 8th Avenue, and we're going to be turning left here. And you're probably all familiar with this area, that there's a nice steep hill that we're about to go down. And as we go down, look at what happens to the terrain. The terrain gets quite steep, and then we have somebody going extremely slowly in front of us, which is okay, because I do want to go slow. But now look how flat this is. This area is flat from 23rd Street, which we just stopped, all the way to 34th Street for 11 blocks. It is absolutely flat. And you will actually see that we'll pass a couple of signs that mention streams. So we're going to be passing over some streams. So what kind of a terrain are we looking at right here, where it's absolutely flat and it is just barely above the river level? What we're looking at is a floodplain, and here's part of the river. I'm not sure which creek really. I'm not sure which creek this is, but it's just barely above it. What's going to happen in an area like this anytime we have a heavy rainfall, say during a hurricane? What's going to happen is that this is going to flood. This is a very flat plain that floods. Guess what this is called? This is a floodplain. And we're going to see another one in just a minute. So I'm going to hold this here because I think we do pass a sign finally that gives us the name of one of the creeks. There's a number of creeks that pass under us, right underneath us, right in this area. And by the way, you'll notice also that there are pylons. There's Saturn. I don't know if you guys, hopefully you're all familiar with this. Oh, here's Possum Creek. There's a green sign that we just passed. And here is a pylon for Jupiter. And if you're not familiar with this, what we're looking at here on the left side of the street is a 2-scale map, basically, of the solar system. Mars, Earth, Venus, Mercury, and then finally we have the sun right there. And this is, it's something like a 1 to 400 billion or something scale. But it starts here at the corner of 34th Street and 8th Avenue and goes all the way up to the corner of 22nd Street, which we were on just a minute ago. Okay, we're going to be okay, we're recording. Well, welcome to our last field trip stop. This is to orient you. 34th Street is right over here. Tires Plus is here. Burrito Famous, which is, by the way, a really good burrito place. I'm going to stop there before I leave from here. 34th Street, University runs east to west behind the camera. And then we have the Sunflower Health Store over here. Okay, so let's go through some of this. Well, let's talk about what we're seeing here. First of all, you can see the creek is right here. It's quite wide in this area. It's quite different from what we were looking at before. It's moving quite slowly. There's a crow over there taking some food. It's at most maybe a foot deep in this area. And it's moving from, let's see, from your right to your left in that direction, from east to west. And from here it turns to the left and it flows underneath University Avenue and continues to head to the south. When we look at this, we notice a number of things. First of all, you can see that there's some fairly steep banks here, but as I'll show you in a little while, it's very flat. And if you remember what I was talking about as I was driving over here, this entire area is extremely flat. This is a floodplain. And in fact, I have been here maybe 25 years ago. I came here right after a heavy rainstorm, and the water had filled up to about here, which means that if it had filled up maybe another 6 inches, this area would in fact have flooded and lived up to the name of a floodplain. At that point, the river was, what is that, maybe 50 feet wide, maybe 6 or 7 feet deep, and it was an absolute roaring torrent. It would have been very difficult or very dangerous to have gone in for a swim at that point. Obviously, it's a lot less right now. The other thing that was notable about it is that there used to be a lot of vegetation all around in this area. There were reeds growing up, there were cattails, and that slowed down the rate of water flow, and that's one of the reasons that it filled up so much. The city takes a lot of care now into making sure that there are not any weeds. I'm not sure how they get rid of them, whether they come down and pull them out or what, but they do make sure that you don't get a lot of vegetation in here, specifically to prevent the likelihood of flooding. So let's take a look at the questions here. First question here, elevation of the creek. And obviously you can't just look at this and say and tell, but I will post on our Canvas exercise for this, and also on the web page for this. I'll post a picture of part of the map right in this area, and you'll be able to measure it. And think about this, measure it from the level of the floodplain, and then go down about 6 feet and measure the level of the water itself. And you'll see, obviously, it's a little bit deeper there where the water is. Describe the topography. We've just talked about that. What is the geologic term for this area? We've talked about that. What is the age of this region? Is this a youthful? Is this a mature? Or is this an old age stage of river development? There used to be a lot of high ground around here, and you'll notice when you look at the elevation right here, it's considerably lower than when we looked at the first couple stops, when we looked at behind Northside Park and when we looked at Ring Power. That's quite a bit higher than it is now. We've come down a long way, and all the overlying terrain that used to be here has been eroded away, and we have now pretty much flat land. So that would make this what kind of river development? Okay, think about that. I'll give you a hint. It's not mature and it's not youthful. The next question, where does the creek go from here? Well, if you go down in that direction, as I said, the river turns to the south. It flows underneath University Avenue, and look at the map and you'll see that it really just stops and there's kind of a lake, but just south of that there is something known as Hogtown, I believe it's Hogtown Prairie. And Hogtown Prairie is where the creek eventually trickles down and goes underground. So this is not a creek that eventually joins up with the Santa Fe River or the Suwannee River or anything like that. This eventually ends just maybe a mile or less to the south of us, and percolates down underground to become part of our groundwater. And eventually that groundwater, as it gets filtered and hopefully cleaned up, that will percolate off to the northeast, and become part of our drinking water, and eventually may come up in the well field for Gainesville Regional Utilities. Last question, question number 6. Where should you not live when the next hurricane hits the Gainesville area? Why? Well, where should you not live the next time the Gainesville experiences a hurricane? It's absolutely in an area like this. This area does experience floods every now and then. This area, as far as I know, has not flooded out since I've lived in Gainesville, but it has flooded in the past. I believe it flooded last in the 60s and then in the 70s. Think about this. This is actually a really important issue because probably most of you are going to be interested in buying a house at some point in the future. And my wife and I bought our house about 15 years ago. And as we were looking, I told her, Sheila, there are certain places that we cannot look because as a geologist, I'm supposed to know better. And if I got flooded out, then I would be humiliated amongst my peers. And in fact, we know another geologist who did get flooded out a couple years ago from, was it Hurricane Irma? And of course, all the geologists that know him gave him all sorts of grief about that because he had a creek in his backyard and he really should have known that his house could get flooded. When we finally found our house, we found it on a hillside maybe 15 or 20 feet higher than the next closest creek, which was also at least several hundred yards away. And when we found this house, that's not the only reason we bought it, but when we found this house, I turned to Sheila, my wife, and said, Sheila, we will not have to get federal flood insurance because this house is not in danger of being flooded out. And sure enough, when we had the house assessed, they said you do not need federal flood insurance because you're not going to get flooded. So you don't have to be a PhD geologist to do that. You guys now know enough to prevent that on your own. If you start looking for a house, make sure that it's not in the low ground, but that it's in an area which is not likely to be flooded out. Okay, let me grab this and I will just kind of wander around a little bit. We'll go down to the creek and we can take a look a little bit closer at it. And you can see it's kind of ugly. There's a lot of algae in the water. But you can also see there's a bunch of ripple marks in the sediment, both over here where the black is material that's collected in it, and also on dry ground. I hope you can see this. Again, I'll take some photos of it with my other camera. But you can see that there are ripple marks on the dry sand here, and that's from a time not long ago when the water was maybe half a foot higher or maybe a little less, and water was moving in that direction, and it created these ripple marks due to the moving water. It's a nice bedding plane feature. You do find these preserved in geology fairly often. I've found a set of beautiful ripple marks, and it's not an unusual thing. Some other things to notice, you can see that we're quite a bit lower than the surrounding area. The other thing to notice is look at that riverbank over there, and I'll climb up a little bit here so that we can look down on it. And what we can see, if you look carefully, is that the edge of the riverbank is a little bit higher than the lawn on the other side. And that's because this is a natural levee. When a river floods, as soon as the river gets outside the riverbanks, the water slows down and coarse-grained materials such as sand and gravel deposit out, and they form long linear hills parallel to the rivers, and those are known as natural levees. People unfortunately have a natural inclination to say if a little of something is good, a lot of something is better, and they add lots and lots of artificial levees on top of the natural levees, and it does help prevent floods, but it also makes sure that when you do get floods over an artificial levee, that the flood is more catastrophic than it would have been otherwise. And so there's a lot of reasons why it's not necessarily a good idea to build artificial levees on top of natural levees. The other thing I want to show you, I'll just point this around a little bit. Here's Burrito Famous. That behind Burrito Famous is Tires Plus, and over here we have Sunflower Health Foods. Across the street we've got a number of other shops, and notice that this area is very, very flat. We have many acres in this area coming down from the hill on 8th Avenue, which is off in that direction, which is part of the large floodplain in this area, and that's pretty typical of Florida. This is kind of classic Florida topography. Okay guys, this is actually going to be our last field trip. I have received word today that Alino State Park and Gilchrist Blue Springs is closed, and so I'm not going to be able to go there. And I was planning on going there and walking around to give you a virtual field trip. That's not going to be in the cards, so I'm going to try to think of some other lab that we can do where I won't have to go on any kind of a field trip for you. But it's been great having you. I will be in touch again because we will be having a final exam. But good luck, stay safe, and we'll be in touch. Bye-bye.